Hi, I'm Carmen Alana Tibbets, and today I am joined by this sweet little hummingbird figure wearing her brand new sleeveless jacket, and I'm going to show you how to put together a garment just like this one. We'll be using the pattern that you drafted in the first video and some fabric and a little bit of time, a needle and thread, and you can have something that looks just as good as this. Let's get started. Before I begin talking about how to put something together, I think I should mention something about fabric choice. Generally, when you're making dolls, you want to use lightweight fabrics because they are little people, and so you have to think about something thick, looking really big and bulky on a doll. And I usually go with that rule, but of course, most of the time, I decide what fabric to use based on what looks good. So in this case, I have a lightweight handkerchief linen and a silk wool blend and some medium weight fabric, and I'm using these two together to make one of the jackets. And you would think, well, this is going to be kind of bulky, but it actually works out okay. This technique is very forgiving, but the one thing that you do need to remember is you want to use fabrics that press well, because you're going to be pressing your final garment pieces flat. If you use a synthetic, it generally does not want to press those seams flat. So the key thing for me is whether or not it has good pressability. So you've got your little pattern pieces, and then what you're going to do is layer your two fabrics that you're going to use for your garment right sides together. In this case, there really isn't a right side or a wrong side, so you just sort of layer them together. And then I tend to put the more difficult fabric on top. So if you happen to be using a silk as a lining, you would put that on top so that the feed dogs would have something a little bit firmer on the bottom, but there's a lot of forgiveness there. And then you're going to get your pattern and you're going to put it on the fabric, and remember, with your pattern there are no extra seam allowances added except for at the top up here. So this pattern piece, the edge is the actual seam line, so you're just going to put it face down on the fabric, and I use a Sharpie that is going to show up on the fabric, and I mark directly on the fabric like that. So I've got that done over here with some garment pieces. So you've got two fronts and a back, and then all you do, remember, this is right sides together, so this particular combo is a wool and Hawaiian silk print shirt, right sides together, and then you're just going to sew right on that line that you marked, leaving the tops of the shoulders open. So everything else you just sew right on that line. Okay, so once that's done, you have to cut out the pattern pieces. So the benefit here is that you're not cutting out all these tiny little garment pieces and trying to fiddle with them underneath the presser feet and do a perfect 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch or whatever seam. Here, you just throw the whole thing under the sewing machine, and you have a lot of ability to maneuver the fabric underneath the sewing machine, so it's so much easier. Use a normal stitch length, whatever is appropriate for your fabric, and then you're going to cut out all the little pieces. And so I generally do kind of like an 1/8 inch seam. If it's something a little bit ravelier, then I would go ahead and use something maybe a little bit wider. But, do whatever looks good. You don't have to be too careful about it. And so you're just going to cut out your pieces. And the one thing that you do want to do that's very important is you do have to clip the curves. So where the armholes are, and then I have a deep little neckline here. And some people feel a little uncomfortable clipping in perpendicular like this. One helpful thing that you can do is you can clip in sideways. It gives you a little more control. The important thing is that you are clipping to release stress on the fabric when you turn that seam. So you're just going to clip appropriately. It's up to you whether you want to clip off the corners. I usually don't. I mean, you would think that it would make a big difference, but it doesn't. So you're going to cut out all of your little pieces, and then you have to turn them right sides together. And so sorry, right side's out. So then you're just gonna sort of fiddle with it. I've got my Sharpie here, and sort of poke it out through that shoulder seam, and then you turn it. And sometimes it's helpful to have something to poke into the corners. And normally I would say don't ever use scissors to do that. I use a crochet hook, but of course I left it on the other side of the studio, so I'm going to very carefully do this. You know, it's one of those things, do as I say, not as I do. So you want to go ahead and push out all of the corners, and it doesn't look so great at this point. So now what you need to do is you need to press very carefully. So you go over to the iron and you sort of roll this out so that you have the exact edge of the seam, and you're going to press just one seam at a time very carefully. Press, 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 press all the way over here, all the way around the thing until the whole thing is relatively flat. And I have another example set up here. So here's that fabric that I started out with, and you can see that it does press pretty flat. And if you're doing a careful job, then you're not really going to see the lining from the outside. Although, you know, if you want to pick a lining that matches or is complementary, that might help you out. So now I have my garment front, so in this case I'm making a jacket that has an overlapping front, and then I have the back, and now I have to put them together. So you need your little doll, and here we have one of our little hummingbirds, and now you're going to place the garment pieces kind of on the doll and fiddle with it until it looks about right. So remember, everything is sewn closed except for the shoulder seam. So now you want to just sort of turn that under and pin it kind of where the shoulder seam is going to be. And I usually pin it to the doll, but you know, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. So for this case, I'm just going to sort of fold it under and just sort of pin it in place. This guy is really cute. And then you're going to do the same thing for the back. And I'm just going to show you here what's going to happen. So you're going to pin that also at the top of the shoulders. And then you notice that the way that I do my garments, and you don't have to do this, but I have an overlap at the side seams. So I'm going to butt these shoulder seams together. I'm going to show you that in a minute, but I don't do that at the sides. You can if you want to. So you would just butt your joints together, your seams together at the sides and sew them together, but I don't do it that way. So let's just go ahead and do one of the shoulder seams so you would know where to turn those under. And I'm just gonna set this aside and pull this one off. And so let's say that you had two and they were like this. And the reason that you want to pin fit on the doll is that after you've stuffed your doll, dolls tend to be asymmetrical on their bodies just like you are. So the left side and the right side can be different, and so you need to pin fit every particular garment. So the goal is to butt it together. You could do it just on the front like this and not worry about any ugliness on the back and, you know, just sew that down or whatever. But what I do is I would then go and press this so I know where that crease is, but if you have a good natural fabric, it will usually hold a crease. And then you just turn that shoulder area, that excess fabric. This is why you did the extra fabric on the top of your pattern. You just turn it to the inside. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing on the front piece. Give it a good pinch in lieu of a pressing, and just turn it to the inside. And you want to do a careful job. I'm doing kind of a quick, messy job here. Press, 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 pinch, pinch, pinch. So now what you would do is you would butt these seams together and you would stitch this along the front and then along the back. And what it will do is it will give you a relatively invisible seam. So let's take a look at a finished garment. This is a little javelina baby here, and so this is a silk garment, so it's silk on the inside and the outside. And so let's take his garment off so we can see what's going on here. So you can see that the shoulder seams, you know, they look like normal seams. And I don't worry about trimming that extra fabric inside here unless I'm using really bulky fabrics and it looks like I have a big lumpy thing. But you can see that it's finished on the inside and the outside, and it looks pretty good. So it's a cute little jacket. And then on the side seams, what I do is after I've put the shoulder seams together, I put it back on the doll, and then I figure out where I need to have the side seams. And so then I'll just pin that in place, and I do slip stitching, usually just on the outside, sometimes on the inside. This one has it on the inside too. And then I leave all of this open. And the reason for that is that my dolls, the hip joints are kind of big. And so if you have a very form-fitting jacket that goes below this hip line and you have movement in the doll, the jacket won't be able to expand and give you enough, what would be the equivalent in a human, wearing ease, so that it looks okay. So I keep that open. It's kind of like a larger side vent that you would have on a human-sized jacket. Now, one thing that's interesting about this little jacket is that it is silk, so it's relatively lightweight fabrics. And when you have small pieces like this and you are displaying a doll standing, you might not have enough weight for something lightweight to hang properly. So I've added beads at the bottom to give it that extra weight so it hangs. And in this case I've added little pockets here, and I did that when I was sewing all of my pieces together. So you can see now this is a very adaptable technique. You can piece any of the fabrics that you're using for either the inside or the outside. If you want patterns on your garment, that would work out really well. But sewing the pieces individually and then putting them together this way, I find, is very adaptable, very simple, relatively fast, and gives you a lot more control over thin or difficult fabrics. So give it a try. Now that you have all the information on how to make a basic sleeveless jacket, I'll be talking about embellishments and adding sleeves and collars in future videos. So see you soon. Bye-bye.